Okay, good afternoon. It is 1 o'clock on August 26th. We are officially calling this meeting of the AIB to order. As a reminder, this meeting is being recorded as public record, and that participation in a recorded meeting will be deemed as consent to be recorded, including statements both written and oral. Public records, including this recording, can be requested at any time in accordance with the Vermont Public Records Act. So welcome. Thanks for coming. Let's first go through our introductions quickly, and we'll start with AIB members that I see on the call. So first on my list is Sarah.
Hi, sorry, I was having lunch. Sarah Owen, I'm the state toxicologist with the health department, and I will probably be off camera so I can eat said lunch. Thank you.
Enjoy. Abby.
Yep. Hi, Abby Pajak, DEC CAFO program.
Thanks. Steve Schubart.
Steve Schubart, grass-fed beef farmer, first generation farmer. Glad to be here.
Thank you. Wendy Sue.
Wendy Sue Harper. I'm a soil scientist and I represent the soil biology position. Thank you.
Thank you. We're just doing our quick member introduction. So Amanda, go ahead.
Amanda St. Pierre, dairy farmer in Berkshire and a member of Vermont Dairy Producers Alliance.
Thanks for coming. And Nate.
Hello, Nathan Norse, Montgomery, Vermont, Nate Norse Consulting.
Great. I don't think I see any other members on the call. In the room, you have myself. My name is Morgan Griffith. I work with the Public Health and Ag Resource Management Division of the Agency of Agriculture. And Steve Darnell is not in the room yet, but he also works, he's the director of that division with the Agency of Ag, and he is going to join us in just a few minutes. And then I'll keep going around the room. So go ahead, Jill.
Jill Goss, Agricultural Input Regulatory Specialist with the Agency of Agriculture.
Pam Breyer, Agrochemical Toxicologist with these people. Like a posse today.
That's right. Brooke.
Sorry, I had to get unmuted.
Okay,
Sorry. I too was having lunch. Brooke Decker, I also in the farm division, and I am pollinator health specialist.
Thanks. How about Jared Carpenter?
Afternoon, everyone. Hope you're well. Jared Carpenter with Lake Champlain Committee.
Thanks for joining us, Jared. Kirsten.
Hi, everyone. I'm Kirsten Bourgeois. I'm Director of Marketing and Industry Affairs for DFA.
Laura Johnson.
Yep. Hello, Laura Johnson with UVM Extension, Pollinator Support Specialist.
Thanks for joining us. We're going to hear later from Laura. She's on our agenda today, so thanks very much for joining us early, Laura. And Steve Lee, Dr. Lee.
Hey, Steve Lee. I'm a extension professor in Auburn University, based in Auburn, Alabama.
Thank you. We'll hear more from Dr. Lee in just a few minutes. And I think the last person I see is Zach.
Zach Schakowsky, Agency of Agriculture, Farm Division.
All right, thank you all. Is there anybody on the call that I missed? Oh, Becky, go ahead.
Becky
Sorry.
Langer, no problem. Becky Langer, State Regulatory Engagement for Bear Crop Science.
Thank you. All right, so just logistics wise, we sent out the minutes for our meeting on July 22nd. I didn't hear back from anybody with any edits. Are we okay accepting those minutes? See a nod. Great. And thank you all very much for dealing with my pestering emails and filling out the survey. Last I checked, there was 9. Maybe someone snuck in last minute, but thank you very much. That's great participation. So thanks for taking the time to fill out the survey about Neonics. We will talk about it more next time. We'll kind of tally those results for BMPs as we work on a draft document for kind of more encompassing neonic BMPs than what we had previously for treated seed. So I know our agenda says the ag update is now. Because Steve is in another meeting for a minute, I'm going to push that back until after Dr. Lee's presentation. So basically, we invited Dr. Lee here. We have obviously been really focused on neonics and treated seeds of late, and so we wanted to give our brains a break for a minute and to start thinking about something that is in the future for us potentially. And so we have the legislative charge of exploring and maybe even incentivizing ag practices that reduce the use of pesticide. And so Dr. Lee is hopefully going to give us a little bit more of his background and his research, but it's mainly around pesticide applications by drone. So thank you, Dr. Lee, and I can hand it over to you.
Okay, thank you. Let me see if I can share my screen. Okay, how does it look?
It looks perfect. Just the slide. Yep.
Okay, all right, great. And I think I can speak up to like maybe for 50 minutes, 45, 50 minutes. I mean, I can go long, I can go short. I just want to respect your time.
Yep, I think 50 minutes would be great. I think we have 2 more speakers today. Dr. Heather Diary is slotted after you. She might be a few minutes late, and so depending on what I hear from her, you might have a few extra minutes. But let's shoot for 50 minutes.
Okay, all right. I'll try to go short a little bit in case there are a few questions, in case somebody want to ask questions. Yeah. All right. Yeah, I appreciate for the invite today. And again, I don't know about the audience very well, but it sounds like I don't think any of y'all have working experience with these drones. It doesn't sound like we have commercial operators or farmers actually flying drone here. So I'm gonna make the presentation fairly broad in general, so you can understand the concepts. I think that should be the goal for today. Again, quick introduction of myself. I work for Extension, so we're like farmer support agency. We do lots of field trials, and we answer a lot of questions from the growers of all different kinds. My specialty is in herbicide, so I got all my 3 degrees from agronomy department, so just hardcore row crop guy. And then about 4 years ago, started to play with all these drones, and with my pesticide application background, it wasn't a very difficult shift, over time. But it has been a very interesting 4 years because I learned a lot myself and also witnessed this new technology from just taking off to rapidly adopted by many farms, many operators across the country. So you can say we're in a spray drone frenzy right now. It's a very hot topic. It's quickly adopted by many, many different farms. People figure out so many different usages with this new tool. So if we write down all the things people have done with these spray drones, the list can go very long, definitely over a page, easily. So we're going to overview some of these applications in crop management and natural resource management as well. Hopefully this will give you some idea about this new technology. All right. So like I said, my business is, or my research focus is in pesticide application, pesticide efficacy, drift, off-target movement, this type of stuff. So whenever you think about people spray their crop for, insect disease or weed control, or this could be plant growth regulators and whatever, you're thinking about a tractor, hauling a boom sprayer, or this could be a self-propelled big old John Deere sprayer with, very big wheels so it can drive over top of the crop and spray. Drone spraying is quite different just because we don't have a huge tank. The largest spray drone tank, commercially speaking, is about 18 gallons at this stage. So it's not very big versus a 1,000 to 1,500 gallon size tank on a self-propelled sprayer. So this means when you fill up the drone tank, it sprays out in 3 to 4 minutes. It come back for a refill. So you are refilling the drone tank and swapping battery about every 5 minutes when you spray with the drone. This is why when we do drone spraying, we need to have these drone mixing and a battery charging trailer at the side because we need to refill just every couple of minutes. And also, this is why people may say it's a pretty labor-intensive process because of that. You're gonna be staying outside in the hot, blazing sun. It could be hot and humid day. You basically just lift heavy batteries, swapping batteries, charging batteries, refilling the drone tank for hundreds of times or, during the day. So it can get sweaty and, tedious. So I'm not gonna be shy about this physical challenge part because that's also part of a drone spray. But the good thing is you can see from these trailers, it has mixing tank, water tank, pumps, and all of those. We mix our chemical at site, which means we don't have to drive back and forth back to the shop to mix. And it saves travel time as well. So this is a difference between the drone spraying and the ground sprayer spraying. And also we can put all the things we need on the trailer and be able to haul this trailer even on interstate. So the commercial drone operators will be able to spray across multiple states because of that. I have not seen the ground spraying crew doing that very often. And also for crop dusters, they are able to fly to Midwest to spray fungicide, but it's still not as easy as these guys basically can pack up and go anytime they want to and go anywhere they want to. All right, excuse me. So there are about 3 ways you can spray crops, I'm using corn as an example. You can see drone spray over the top of corn versus airplane. And this video come from our fluorescent dye study, one of few projects, So the ink dye lingers over the top of corn canopy for a little while. before all these small droplets can eventually fall into the canopy. This is why when you hire an area applicator, it's always worked the best when you spray when there's no wind. Because if there's a little bit of wind, it's going to blow this pink cloud downwind and cause the off-target movement. When you spray with a drone, we're seeing a little bit stronger propeller downdraft effect. You can see the drone pushes down the corn canopy a little harder. All right, it still creates a drift concern. By this stage, data suggests spray drone drift is not as bad as airplane drift because it's still operating at a lower speed. It's kind of in between airplane and a ground sprayer in terms of drift potential. All right, so how does it work in the field? This is a new disease showing up in Midwest and upper Midwest. You guys probably can find it up to Pennsylvania as well. I don't know how much corn is out there in Vermont. I have never been to Vermont either. But you know, if somebody grow corn over there for dairy cows or for animal feed, this might be something of concern, you know. So this is a non-treaty check plant. If your corn already has this much of disease on the plant, you can expect minimum 50% of yield reduction. You know, you lose half of your yield. This is the plot sprayed by the drone with Valtima fungicide at a 7 ounce per acre rate, 2 gallon per acre using a T40. Valtima is not cheap as a fungicide, but it gets the job done. You know, you see very few disease lesions on the plant. It looks very healthy. On-treaty check strip 50 60 feet wide was defoliated first by the disease. Unhealthy plants usually die off first. Healthier plants stay greener way longer. All right. And also in this case, you saw the untreated plant, they die off first. Fungicide alone, you know, spray with fungicide, you see a more green leaves over the top. Fungicide with boron, with micronutrients, that make the most healthy plants. This is usually what we like to see in agronomy. You know, corn cob, if you look at a ear, it's yellow, which means the ear is ready for harvest, but the corn plant is still alive. It's not dead, you know, and it's still lush green over the top. This is usually a sign of high yielding crop. All right, again, on the left, this plot received a straticle only at the V8 stage. The plot on the right also received straticle at the V8 stage, followed by Valtima and the foliar feed, foliar nutrient at the tassel stage. You can see this case from central Indiana. You are able to see the canopy, particularly the lower half, the bottom half of the canopy, is healthier because of Valtima versus just one trip at a VA stage. VA stage corn is not that big, you know, it's probably pocket high, you know, a little too early. So more fungicide can typically help the plant stay healthy and also maintain the stalk strength. You know, that's another thing people are concerned about. Fungus can eat up the tissue inside the stalk, make them very easy to lodge. If they're on the ground, you cannot harvest them for anything. So we run a lot of testing in field. We want to see how much product can actually make through the canopy and reach the target. We want to protect the ear leaf. So we measured a lot of these over the years, and we found airplane pretty much deliver about same amount of fluorescent dye to the ear leaf versus drone at a 2 gallon per acre. So these are some of the data from 2023, I think last year, yeah, 2023. At the two sides, T30 drone, T40 drone versus airplane, we saw statistically similar dye deposition on the ear leaf. Because a lot of people ask how does a spray drone compare to airplane? I mean, when you spray 2-3 gallon per acre using the optimal setting, they're pretty similar. And also you can use adjuvants like a drift reducing agents to increase the deposition. So in this case, each vial represents the amount of dye we washed off from the ear leaf. All right, so each vial represents 1 ear leaf. You know, this is the whole block that we sampled from the field. You don't need to have a spectrophotometer or fluorometer. You are able to tell the dye, the pink color is more intense after we use the drift reducing agent, because drift reducing agent not only reduce drift, it also increase deposition, increase canopy penetration. It will make more of your product stay in the field, get into the canopy instead of flying off the field. Because if they fly off the field, they're drift, they're environmental contaminant, and also it's your money flying away from you at the same time. Okay, seeing is believing. So you can see the amount of droplet hits without using DRA and by using a drift agent. It's making a difference visually speaking. All right, insects. You can also spray insecticides with a drone or a plane. This has been done for a lot of time. We have a lot of defoliating insects. They basically just eat up all the leaves, you know. Picture on the left shows you a plant. It used to be a soybean plant. Now it's just sprigs, you know. There's no leaf no more. The worms just eat up all the leaves. The picture on the right shows all the pigweed without leaves. You know, the insects can defoliate a lot of plants, and that's because of this worm right here, the soybean looper. This picture shows the Mastodon Max insecticide application by the drone. So the field on the right, this field was sprayed. The field on the left was not sprayed with anything because that's his neighbor's soybean field, a free non-treated check. You can see the difference between treated and untreated by the drone. Also, you can spray herbicide with a drone, although the risk is higher. All right, if you drift the herbicide, it's going to show. If you drift the herbicide to your neighbor's field, to neighbor's garden, yard, or horticulture plants, nursery, you might be paying for the crop damage, and it can be a lot of money. So I'm not a big advocate of spraying foliar herbicide, burn down herbicide, non-selective herbicide with drone in row crop setting, but you are able to make good applications sometimes depending on the environmental condition. And also you can apply a lot of herbicide in pasture, hayfield, rangeland, forestry, non-crop area. It actually works out a lot better in those scenarios. All right. So in burn down situation, before planting, we can get the weeds killed fairly efficiently with a drone if you can get a fairly calm and windless days. If this is windy, you know, 10 mile per hour, 20 mile per hour, you can forget about using drone to spray. It's gonna drift all over the place. This is another example of a burn down case. You know, the day of application versus about 13 days after. Drone flew underneath the power line around that pole and they kill pretty much all the weeds out there before planting. It still can be done, but this type of herbicide operation is the hardest job among all applications of different pesticide. Because if you drift, if you missed a spot, if you set your swaths too wide, if you spray in a windy day, it's going to show where you missed. But if you know what you're doing, you're an experienced operator, you have the optimized setting, you use drift control agent, you can still get a knife cut clean lines between where you spray and where you did it, you know. So there's a lot of if out there. So this is why I said you can do it, but I don't think everyone else, you know, I don't think everyone will be able to do it. Some people just want to push, you know, when they get to the field. And if you spray this type of foliar herbicide when it's windy, you can leave a lot of green streaks in the field that you didn't kill. Herbicides are very honest. You miss a streak, you miss a spot, you miss a pass, it's going to show. And that will be bad for the business if you're a commercial operator. We get lots of morning glory before corn harvest. We have to kill this or desiccate this morning glory so we can combine the corn. Otherwise, when you drive your combine into a field like this, morning glory vines will just drag all the corn on the ground. You just run them over. You're not going to be able to harvest anything. So we sprayed this field with a desiccant. This is a nozzle drone, older T30 version. You can see it produce a lot of fine droplets. So you have to pick and choose which day to spray. This is the spot with a ton of morning glory, and the drone just blew fine droplets of herbicide into this canopy. So you cannot spray when it's really windy. But after about 13 to 14 days, the efficacy was very impressive. There is nothing green there. You can also see this clean cutoff line between sprayed and untreated check area. You know, so it looks very good on our end. Desiccation effect looks really good. You see the dry morning glory vines, they're very crispy. They can be broken up even with binder or your fingers very easily. So the combine will have no problem driving across this field and not worrying about dragging the corn down. Well, cotton is a big crop down in the south. We have to defoliate a crop. You know, we can defoliate with airplane or we can defoliate with a drone. The efficacy are very similar, you know, just like what we found out from the corn canopy deposition study. Soybean desiccation is another one. Before harvest, a lot of growers want to dry up the beans, you know, drop the leaves, dry the stem, you know, make the soybean field look like this. You basically just got a bunch of dead plant sticks out there. They're dry, they're ready to go. So this will make harvest a lot easy, you know, if you are sitting on that combine. We also have done a bunch of testing in soybean canopy. I'm not gonna go much into this. You know, the DRA, the drift reducing agent, also help penetrating the soybean canopy. We just saw the results. You also don't want to defoliate a canopy this thick. This is too much for the drone. You know, you probably need to come back and spray another time to completely desiccate a canopy like this. This is way too early. But you can see in the pattern of this drone spray. If I go back a little bit, you can see the pattern when you spray in the day with no wind. It's very pretty, you know, and you can cover the left side and right side of the drone evenly without drifting to one direction. All right, now I'm gonna go down to this nitty-bitty stuff. This is for commercial operators when I use the trading. Like I said, I never been to that part of the state. I wish I could. I bet there could be some orchards or vineyards, considering the amount of large cities on the East Coast, you know. For those farmers that have perennial tree crops, you can use the spray drones to spray insecticide and fungicide versus your traditional ground blaster. When you spray tree crop, you have to use very slow speed and blow a lot of volume into the tree. So for a tree of this size, you know, these are 20 some years old orange trees. You need minimum 20 gallon per acre, you know, and also you need a application mapping to make sure your drone is flying exactly over top of the tree rows. You know, sometimes if the tree is too big, you might have to customize your route and spray twice, spray like 2 passes per rows to make sure you cover both sides of the tree instead of just flying over top of the tree crown, you know. So this is all depends on the canopy width and the thickness. All right, on vineyards. Some vineyards are planted on very steep mountainside because the quality of the grape can be higher. I just got back from Germany earlier this summer. We toured some of those farms around the Rhine River. you can see some of those vineyards are even worse than the one in this video. You know, it's literally on very steep mountainside. I don't even know how these guys can walk in that vineyard to harvest the grapes. They said they hire all those Eastern European laborers to do those, you know, dangerous and tedious job, which I believe, you know, and they get paid very little as well. So in the States, you know, if you have a vineyard like this, they either don't get sprayed very often, or sometimes they don't get sprayed at all, because it's very difficult to drive a tractor on this type of terrain. You know, you have a rollover concern there. And for people to backpack spray a vineyard like this, that's gonna take a while. And also, I feel bad for the poor guy, you know, putting 50 pounds of liquid behind his back and walking on a hill like this. You know, it's a very labor intensive. With drones, you can get it sprayed very, very easily. This is not even a thing anymore. Again, like I said, there's so many usages out there. You just have to find your niche. But once you find your niche and it works out really well, that could be a really sweet spot for you, you know, as a commercial operator or for a farm. So that's how the drones gets used on those challenging terrains to save labor, you know, to increase safety of the worker as well. If we can reduce backpack spraying, we can reduce human exposure to pesticide. We want to do it at all time. We also tried a blueberry. You know, we had this little blower spraying fluorescent dye for us. We can see it's penetrating the blueberry on each side. Or you can also spray with a drone over the top. You know, they create a lot of wind to blow the fine mist into the canopy. This is also a cool video. We sprayed this one last month in Missouri, all right, because I don't have grapes down here. We have the wild grapes, the muscadine, but some of the winemaker refuse to call muscadine a grape because it's very difficult to use. Although I do like the fresh muscadine I can buy from grocery store. They taste pretty well. The skin are pretty thick though. It's very different than table grapes. But these are the vineyard in Missouri, and you can see how drones spray grape wines, and how the fluorescent dye looks at night. So this is a newer model of spray drone T50. It has a 4 rotoatomizers. We're basically blowing wind and really fine droplets into that canopy, and almost like power washing the plants with, you know, whatever product you need to spray, mostly fungicide and insecticide. You can see the turbulence and the coverage on the ground. Yeah, it's almost like power washing the plants. And this is how that fluorescent dye looks at night under UV lights. To visualize the droplet size, you know, you can see the droplets start showing up. Yeah, and my students were really excited, you know, after seeing this. We also had a ground blaster. Their ground blaster sprayed the dye for us. We sprayed the same amount of dye, about 40 grams per acre. Spray drone like this treatment, spraying 16 gallon per acre versus ground blaster spray 40 gallon per acre. I think we recorded significant more dye on the canopy or in the canopy from the spray drone versus that ground sprayer. That data was just analyzed last week. These are how the coverage looks like from that application at night. Yeah, horticulture spraying is interesting because you can map the field. You can use AI to recognize trees. You can do 3D spraying. You can do your customized route design. It's way more fun than tedious row crop spraying, which is just AB line back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, you know. Also, every orchard has to start with small trees. You know, unless you just inherited a bunch of really old trees, but at some point you have to plant new trees. The problem with young trees, like a little tree seedling like that, is they don't have a lot of leaves. they don't have much canopy, you still have to spray them. All right, if you don't spray them, they may not have leaf anymore after summer because of disease or insects. But when you spray little tree seedlings, 3, 4, 5 feet like this, without without much leaves, the ground blaster you saw in this case, the ground blaster is horribly inefficient. You create a chemical cloud covering the whole orchard, and then most of the droplets are wasted because the canopies are so little, they're so small. Or 80% of your chemical is wasted, So what's the more efficient way to spray chemicals without creating this drift concern? Because if you waste 80% of chemical, they don't hit a target. They just move with the wind or land on the ground. They run off. They're just environmental pollutant, So to save money, you can use the drones to spray each individual tree in this rotary dancing mode. And you can even specify how much, like I want to spray half gallon on this tree. You can even be precise to that level, You can be very precise when you do that. These are all what new technology allows you to do, to be precise, to save money, and also to reduce the environmental impact. All right, using spray drones to control algae and aquatic weeds in lakes, pond, any type of water body is becoming very, very popular on the East Coast. Now we got more water than folks in the West. This is a video of how they treat a lake in, I want to say Kentucky or somewhere, You don't need a nozzle anymore. You basically just, apply your tank mix into the water, and water is gonna even out your herbicide. You can see the algae and aquatic weeds underneath. This is a public park that they want to spray. The day of application, 3 weeks later, you can see this nasty algae, floating at the surface. The water disappears, so the water become clean again. All right, these are some really nasty green algae. If you ask me, do you want to swim over here? Oh heck no. This is nasty. In summer. And also, if you look at this spot, the day of treatment and 3 weeks later, the edge of the bank become a lot more cleaner. All right, this is a irrigation pond. This is my neck of the woods. We got more weeds than anybody else because the warm weather and the rain. So this used to be a 22-acre irrigation pond. Weeds always start from the edges, from the perimeters, and slowly grow into the pond. So by the time we spray this pond, I think they only have about 5 acres they can use for irrigation. The rest is just all junks, algae and weeds and whatever. So we sprayed the pond with high rates of glyphosate. Some of these perennial smartweed and the Hamsusbania was like 2-floor high, probably 15 feet tall, easily. These are just, area that you cannot get into with anything. You can't get in there with boat. You cannot walk in there. You cannot use a 4-wheeler to spray because it's just mud. It's like marsh. So these are what we called hard to access area. So if you want to spray this type of area, drone is the best. So 3 weeks later, that irrigation pond looks a lot better. They were pretty impressed. Another case, they're trying to control an invasive species somewhere in Florida, I think. Marsh, you can see the water down there, This is another area that you cannot get into with anything, not a boat, not by foot, not by a four-wheel drive or whatever. Maybe a airboat can do it, but so far I haven't seen people using airboat to spray because that thing makes too much wind and turbulence from the turbine. This is how they spray the cattail plants in the park. You can see the water. All right, so after the mission, they landed. And you can spray some really tiny spot as well. Move back a little bit. All right, so this is a day of application. This is 15 days later. You see the spot, it really start to yellow up, you know, because this is invasive species. They're just doing targeted spray in a national park or some sort of a natural preserve. Invasive species spraying has become a pretty big business down here. We also got a lot of timber, so you have to spray those clear cut fields after you get the timbers out, you know. And also you spray young pine trees to kill the rest of the weeds in the field so they can establish quicker. But this is a drone spraying herbicides over some young trees to kill rest of the perennial woody weeds that we don't want. All right. So they got two pictures taken from the same spot, the day of treatment and several weeks later. Obviously, their non-selective herbicide work out pretty good. We can also do variable rate spraying based on crop size. We can also do, this is a prescription for my variable rate application examples. We can also do variable rate spraying using drone-made prescription map. And we can do that on a John Deere sprayer. We can do that on ground sprayer. These are some of the examples sprayed by the large John Deere sprayer, you know, using the variable rate prescription. You know, they spray 16 gallon, 9 gallon, and 6 gallon per acre in the same pass. We can also do spot spraying weeds. You know, this is where we can save some of the herbicides. You only spray the weedy patches in the field, but not the whole field. So you can see the weedy patches from the sky. You got to map the field first, and you can choose where to spray, where you don't. And then in this case, we only sprayed about 12 acres of a 30-acre field. That's about 60% herbicide saving. And then per acre cost of the herbicide was almost $30 per acre. So it's not a cheap product, but we saved about $15 per acre. That's before and after the spot treatment from the same location. This is before the spot spray. This is after the spot spray. All right. This was all done by the drone, you know, so fully autonomous. I guess I'll show this video real quick. You know, this is how the controller looks like. This is autonomous fly. I'm not doing anything. Drone knows where to spray and where it shouldn't. You can see the weedy patches there and here. Flow rate tells you if it's spraying anything or not. Right now, it's not spraying anything. The flow rate is 0 to the system. You can see the flow rate kicks on autonomously and it's spraying those weeds. Still spraying. And then we run out of weeds, just a few weeds out there, it stops spraying. So it's not gonna spray all the weeds out there, but it's gonna hit the patches for you, you know, just like that. Those patches will be covered. We also work out a way to precisely spot spray weeds with a John Deere sprayer. So this is a redneck version of seed spray. You can see some weeds are coming up. And then you can see these little blocks where the ground rig is going to spray. This line is blue. And these shows you which section the nozzles are turned on based on the position of the weeds. Instead of spraying the whole boom, we are spraying with only a section of the nozzle. This is how you reduce your herbicide spray and only apply where you have weeds instead of spraying the whole field. Hope this makes sense. All right, you can also use drones to spread seeds, cover crop seeds, natural species, you know. Because of dry tank, I just got an inquiry. I got a question from North Carolina Department of Transportation. They want to try spread some natural species off the roadside, rights of way to establish those natural species, and they want to know the parameters. of running their own testing. So I gave them some parameters to begin with. You can use the drone to spread cover crop, and it looks very uniform. This plot was spread by drone. This is sunhand, a summer cover crop. After corn harvest, you can see I didn't miss any spot. Uniformity was good. We can spread tillage, radish, rye, oats, and there's a bunch of different seeds. As long as it's not too light, too fluffy, seeds like ryegrass will be difficult because it's lightweight seed. It can blow away by the wind easily, and it's very fluffy. All right. So where do drone fits? Small farm with limited cash flow because the whole drone package only costs 30 grand. That's a lot cheaper than spending $300,000 by a new sprayer. New guys looking for a new business to start. You with limited start funding, that would be a good fit because you can get all the stuff you need and start your custom application business with as little as $120,000, something like that. That's very difficult these days. Any business you want to start may cost more money than that. If you live in a region with lots of terrain changes, you have to spray on mountains all the time. You have a frequent wet period. It gets too wet. Nobody can get in the field. Drones make a lot of sense. If you have a lot of tall crops or crop like rice, drones will be your best friend because they can fly over those crops to spray them. Vegetation management, your remote area with limited or no access, very hard to get to area like those marsh, muddy places, drones will be your best friend. Small odd-shaped fields with many obstacles and tree lines and power lines and cables and whatever, that's best fit for drone because airplanes do not want to handle those fields typically. Challenges for drone operators, regulation is a big one. Wind, whenever you spray, you want to spray, it's always windy. No doubt that's a challenge. We want to see higher efficiency. We are still seeing lots of hardware and software issues. Particularly the hardware reliability is definitely not where we want it to be. There's still a lot of problems, that you run into during the spring season because hardware problem. You have to fix those drones all the time. Pesticide label is another challenge because there is no dedicated label section for drones. They're still too new, too small as a market yet. But as the number of drones and the acreage of drones increase over time, we're seeing more and more interest from agrochemical manufacturers and EPA to consider specific drone labels for down the road. Labor is a limitation. It's just hard to find good quality or good labor, quality labor to do anything these days. Speed, we want the drones to fly even faster because faster means more acres can be sprayed per hour. Obstacle avoidance is a challenge. So many people hit a power line, hit something during the spray season and damage the drone. I mean, it can be fixed fairly easily, but that slows you down. It makes you miss your spray time. It slows your job, in terms translating into losing money. All right. Mixing a refill takes a lot of manpower and it's hot, it's humid outside. So it's not a job for everyone. Usually it's a young kid's job, to do mixing and filling. This is a drone conference that I hosted for the last 2 years, and it's getting really, really popular. These are the images from this previous spring's conference. We have FAA, EPA, Global Spray Drone Task Force, State Department of Ag representative, major drone manufacturers, major drone distributors, and a lot of people from 40 different states, and even a bunch of Canadians flew down to Alabama to attend the conference. And the dates are for next year's conference will be March 23rd to 26th, possibly in Mobile Convention Center in Alabama. Just in case anybody has interest and want to attend the conference, we also offer a remote option so you can watch the presentation on Zoom or watch the recording after the conference. So this is my email address in case somebody want to connect after the presentation, or if you have a question you want to ask. Again, I appreciate for the invitation. Hope everyone find the presentation useful for your work. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Steve. I think we have a question from our Steve in the room.
Yes, thanks. So, yeah, thanks for the presentation. I have a couple of questions actually. So you mentioned that at your conference you had a representative from EPA on the program. Do you know who it was by chance?
Katrina White was the one that spoke, and I talked to Amy Blankenship if she can come down. She tried, but EPA is under such a tight budget cut. Even though we offered to pay her travel, they cannot get the internal approval to travel, even though we agreed to pay for her travel.
Did they make any? Did the EPA representative make any comments about modifying labels for for drone application?
They did. And also global spray drone task force mentioned that as well. They are the working horse actually behind this initiative, particularly Bayer Crop Science.
But did they have any? I mean, obviously they were thinking about it, but any progress to report?
I think they finished the 6 trials in several continents, several countries in 2023. And they are working on those data. Those data may have been processed. I don't know if they have submitted to the regulatory agency yet. So that's one major focus or major project of that task force is to generate data for regulatory agencies to make decisions about drift models. Because the current AgDisp model cannot predict spray drone drift and needs to update. So that's the first step they're making. There has been some discussion in CropLife America, and I attended a meeting last year in Arlington, Virginia. I don't know if they had a meeting this year or not, but CropLife America is also working on the drone label for a little while now. This is one of their initiative along with digital labeling and some other stuff, So.
Right. Thank you. And then the last question is, do you are the drone operators still required to maintain line of sight control?
Depends on your exemptions. Most of the guys are under the requirement to fly within lines of sight. Now, I wouldn't be surprised the FAA is slowly giving away exemptions to allow people to do beyond visual line of sight operation, but beyond visual line of sight operation comes with risk, and FAA is all about how to manage the risk. We need a better hardware. All right, so the current drones can do it, but it doesn't make me very comfortable doing that. You ask me, do I want to fly beyond line of sight? I tell you no, because if I lose signal, very likely I'm gonna crash the drone. So we need a hardware to be a little bit better, but it's gonna happen in the near future because many drones already have the ability to let you put a cell phone SIM card in them. So you have 2 SIM cards. One goes to the remote controller, one goes to the drone. So they'll always connect to each other via cellular network. But again, that's not a bulletproof method either. We spray in ag. We go to middle of nowhere. We're spraying a lot of remote area that we don't have cell signals or poor signals. So this is why I said we can do beyond line of sight operation, beyond visual line of sight operations, but I'm not a big fan of that, at least not yet, until we have better technology.
Great, thank you.
Does anyone else have any questions for Dr. Lee?
I do. Nobody else does.
Go for it, Pam.
I have a question about nozzles and matching droplet, like the label required droplet distribution. How has that worked? Because it seems like some of the drones seem to be inventing new rotary dispensing. Has that worked out well?
Yeah.
What does it look like for the average grower?
I mean, it's not perfect, but it's better than the hydraulic nozzles, in my opinion. I mean, I'm speaking from the end user opinion as well. So rotary atomizer, you can change price, if you let the rotary atomizer spin faster, it's going to create smaller droplets. You let it spin slower, it create bigger droplets, So it's hard to match a rotary atomizer to a specific flat fan nozzle because that's a orange to apple comparison. That's not a fair comparison either. So it just depends on your operation. If your operation requires really small droplets, then go for it. But if you want to reduce drift and reduce evaporation, you're spraying trees, you're flying 20 feet, 25 feet off the ground in low humidity, really hot days, you need to use big droplets, you need to use DRA, you need to use oil surfactant to reduce evaporation, and then you want a really big droplets. And again, I don't know if I'm answering your questions or not.
Yeah, no,
Yeah. I know some labels require certain droplet size and whatever. You can still do that with rotary atomizer. Just it doesn't go by the droplet. Yeah.
Has there been any problem with any specific chemistries that has
With
been
rotary atomizer?
Yeah.
The only one I'm aware of, it worked out really well. The only one I'm aware of is for people spraying weeds in pasture hayfield or forestry. They need a really big droplets. Sometimes that's problematic. The rotary atomizer do not give them big enough droplets. So some of those guys still want to use flat fan nozzle drones to spray auxin herbicides in that case, because they want to have 600 or 700 micrometer droplet size, that's too much for the rotary atomizer. Other than that, it's pretty much all positive for switching to rotary atomizer. I don't want to go back, personally speaking.
Thank you.
The other thing I'll also let you know is if you have a really thick tank mix, which happens all the time, your flat fan nozzles will not be able to spray, because there's not enough pressure to break up that really thick, high viscosity tank mix. But those tank mix can usually be sprayed by rotary atomizer just fine, because rotary atomizer has dedicated power source, and it has a lot more power to break up the thick tank mix into small droplets. So a lot of time, we're almost spraying stuff as thick as paint. We can still paint the plants just fine. Actually, you can spray greenhouse shading paint with rotary atomizer drone very, very well. You can't do that with flat fan nozzles.
Another question. Right. Yeah. Sorry, this Steve again. So, what are in terms of the battery life of the drone? Is the battery life longer with the rotary atomizers or with the pressure? Like a pump for the pressure for if you have to have a certain pressure for the flat fan nozzle, you have to have a pump. I assume on the drone to maintain the pressure, or how does that work?
Battery life has nothing to do with the pump or droplet size and whatever. So I didn't get your question. So are you asking the determining factors for battery life?
No, what I'm
Or-
asking is if you have a drone equipped with flat fan nozzles and you have to maintain a certain pressure, does your battery last longer in that situation, or if you
No.
have to run rotary atomizers?
Rotary atomizer use two very small motors, and they don't use a lot of energy. So the impact on battery life is negligible.
Okay.
I don't know
So
if
on
that's
the-
what you're asking.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm asking. So on the drones that use flat fan nozzles, is there a pressure pump on the drone, or is it you just establish a pressure in the tank before you take off?
So for rotary atomizer drones, you still need a pump, but the pump is a low pressure pump, and the only function or the only requirement for the pump is to pump the tank mix from the tank to rotary atomizer. It doesn't need to create a higher pressure or much pressure.
Okay, but if you're
So
using flat fan nozzles, what do you do?
if you use a flat fan nozzle, you probably need to have a little bit more robust, more powerful pump, you know. But most of the time that pump is not enough to handle the thick tank mix. The pump is overwhelmed. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Battery life is determined by the weight of the drone. That's the number one factor, the amount of payload. And also how many times you make a turn. The more times it needs to turn, the more battery is going to drain. This is why in small fields, you burn the battery first, burn out the battery first.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Great. Any last questions for Dr. Lee? Awesome. Well, we thank you very, very much for taking the time to teach us something new today. You're right. We have very little drone usage here in agriculture right now. But so I think it's just good for us to get dip our toes in the water a little bit. So we thank you very much for sharing your expertise.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah. All right. Glad to be here. Hope everyone found it useful. And yeah, just send me an email if you have any other questions you'd like to follow up with.
Great. We will. Thank you very much.
All right. Have a great day.
You too.
Bye.
So next on our agenda is Heather. I don't see her yet, so I'm going to pass it to Steve for our Agency of Ag update.
Yeah. I'm about the only thing I was going to talk about is what we're currently doing with Triple E. We're spending a lot of our division is actively involved in monitoring for and developing some responses to the Triple E occurrence. You may have seen some stories in the media about it. There have been some press releases, both from the Department of Health and from our agency. There has been one confirmed human case, Triple E, in Chittenden County. We have a group, Patty Casey and Eliza Doncaster, a number of seasonal techs who are conducting some pretty active mosquito surveillance. And so far this year, they've collected and sent to lab, and total of 47 pools of mosquitoes have come back as positive for Triple E. And I think the number's 38 for West Nile virus. And to compare that, I think last year, the entire year, we had 14 pools come back positive. So we're getting to, 3 times the amount so far, and the season's not over. So the takeaway is that the virus is out there, it's circulating. We're finding about half of the pools that were collected in this last round were species that act as what's called bridge vectors, which means that they are capable of biting both, or they feed on birds and mammals, and so they're capable of transmitting the virus to humans it happened, if they happen to take a blood meal and the human gets infected. So the bottom line is we're very concerned, and the Department of Health is very concerned about the prevalence of the disease or the virus right now. No, excuse me, not the disease, the virus in the mosquito bird populations. And so we just want to make sure everybody's aware of it and urge people to take precautions to avoid exposure to mosquitoes, especially in the northwest part of the state. I'm going to share find a map here that the Department of Health has. Yeah, so this is the risk map that the Department of Health has published on their website. Shows the relative risk based on the detections of Tripoli in the mosquito pools, with the highest risk area being there in Chittenden County, primarily because of the human health case that was found there. And then the area above it, which is right now at moderate risk, that's the area where I found the most mosquito pools. And I think actually that area may increase in risk here after some more evaluation. So anyway, if these are the areas where people need to pay particular attention to the possibility of or the areas where you need to avoid contact, and we just want to make sure everyone's aware of that to avoid, so avoid activities at dusk and dawn, use mosquito repellent, don't do activities that increase your chances of having some exposure to mosquitoes. So that's the message. We're heavily involved in that right now, and we'll continue to be involved in that over the next, probably till the first frost. So a lot going on. And with that, I'll just if anybody has any questions.
Thank you, Steve. Does anyone have a quick question about Tripoli? If not, we've got Heather. Hi, Heather. Welcome.
Hi.
You are good to go if you are ready.
Sure. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Yes. So Steve and Morgan asked me to come and give an update on some of the corn, kind of early season corn pests, soybean pests, and the neonicotinoid work that we've been doing here at UVM. We did embark on a second year of kind of monitoring and research with some new trials that we started to put in place. So I'll just share my screen quick. I haven't had time to really put much of the data together yet, but we have a little bit that we shared at the field day. Okay, so I'll start with the past year's work, just as a reminder to everyone. In 2023, we had several new research projects that started to look at neonicotinoids and impacts on farms and water and soil. So we had two research trials, or multiple research trials, one at Borderview Research Farm, where we're looking at the impact of treated and untreated seed on plant stands across 6 planting dates. And we replicated
some of that trial on several on-farm sites in Franklin, Grand Isle, Lamoille, and Addison County. So we were putting treated and untreated corn seed on farm as well, and we were looking at crop measurements primarily. So we repeated those studies this year. And like I said, I haven't really had time to put any of the data together, but we did have far worse crop pest damage this year than we did in 2023. And that was very notable both on farms and at the Borderview Research Station. We started planting at Borderview on May 7th. And if people remember, back to May, April, they were very wet. I mean, it's been a wet season in general, but we had a really wet spring. And for most people, that severely delayed planting because people couldn't get out into the fields. But especially those individuals that did plant in early to mid-May and even into later May, there was a lot of pest damage to those fields. And we saw the same thing in our trial plots. It was very cold. We had very delayed emergence, and we can really see that out and about at the multiple sites. I will also say that we did have a lot of reports from farmers this year about poor stands. Again, it was very cold and very wet. And so, you know, if corn was planted, then we had delayed emergence and just really making that seed susceptible to damage from both diseases and insect pests. So, you know, I'll have more to report data-wise on this, you know, in the coming months. We'll start harvesting some of the corn here in a couple of weeks. So, we also had the site at Discovery Acres, which is in St. Albans Bay, and this is an on-farm research site where we have edge of field monitoring, and we're monitoring water coming out of tiles and also the surface of fields. And so if you remember last year, we were collecting water for nutrient analysis, but we also started to conduct neonicotinoid assays as well to see if we were picking up neonicotinoids in the water that was coming off from the farm field. And this field has been in corn now for multiple years, and the entire field is planted with neonic treated corn seed. So we've also continued this work, monitoring what neonicotinoids might be moving both through into water off from fields through tile and surface runoff. But again, I haven't pulled any of that data together as of yet. But it's been another wet year, so there's plenty of water to measure. That hasn't been a problem. Okay, so a couple of new projects that we started this year was to try to understand how current manure management and conservation practices may or may not impact kind of incidents of these pests. And again, we're primarily looking for seed corn maggots, wireworms, and grubs. So we put out a trial this year that had no-till, cover crops, and manure, and all sort of combinations of those treatments. So you can see all the different combinations here where we have no-till planted corn with cover crops, no-till planted corn without cover crops, or manure. We have broadcasted manure with cover crops, injected manure, no cover crops. So you can see all the different iterations. And this again is very preliminary data that just shows the incidence of pest damage. So we went out and buried corn seed out in the field in these treatments. We also planted corn too, but we buried corn seed in these wire baskets to basically be able to pull them out and look at incidents of different pests. So you can see that what we saw, and again, this is very preliminary, is that when we have tillage and manure, we seem to have more seed corn maggot, wireworm, etc., than when we have no manure and no tillage. So, you know, there is some preliminary data that, you know, already, I shouldn't say preliminary, there's already published data from the 80s and 90s that indicate no-till without any organic amendments, you know, is less attractive to some of these pests. But when you start adding in organic matter amendments like manure and tillage, then those conditions are more conducive to seed corn maggots, as an example. So we did see, we think, an indication that that was true. But again, this is very preliminary, just mostly averages across the trial. But you can see where we didn't have any tillage or manure, we had 4 to 5 seeds that were damaged, and this was out of 20, so that is still quite high, actually. And then you can see where we had manure and tillage, you know, we had anywhere from almost an average of 8 up to an average of 10, so nearly 50% of the seed being damaged. Anyway, so we need to kind of put more of this data together and look at the statistical analysis. I will say there's a lot of variation as well, and so we do know right off that we need to probably replicate even more than we did. It's actually quite an immense amount of work to dig all of these up and, you know, sort of categorize all the damage. So it wasn't a small feat, I will say that. But I do think we need to have more replicates to really understand what's going on there. Okay. So this is actually the planning date study that we conducted last year, and we were looking at flights of the seed corn maggot and looking at corn populations. So it's just showing, again, without just put it like very preliminary, I would say, putting the data together. You can see the green line on the top is how the target population. So that's what we actually planted out in the field. So it was about 34,000 plants per acre. And you can see that the populations were below that at all planting dates. We didn't see yet a lot of statistical difference between treated and not treated corn. As far as plant populations go, there are some differences, but again, we need to look at this more closely to pull out you know, more statistical differences. Just again, this was thrown together, I would say, pretty quickly. But overall, you can see the flights, which are the blue line. So we had one flight, you know, somewhere between the 10th and 18th of May, which is pretty similar to what we saw last year as far as seed corn maggot flies flying. So you can see we had a peak in kind of early May. And we did last year as well. Like I said, this is very similar to last year. And then you can also see we saw another peak, another flight around the 15th of June. And that was fairly similar to last year as well. So we are continuing to monitor the flights of the seed corn maggot. And we did this not just up in Elberg, but we did this at other sites around Addison County and Franklin County. And we also put the treated and non-treated corn seed on farms, 5 other farms. We had plans to do more sites, but because the weather conditions were so adverse this spring, we weren't actually able to do that. Farmers were having enough trouble just getting their work done. They didn't really need another thing to do with us. So, okay. We also looked at alternative seed treatments, and we looked at that in corn, and we looked at that in soybeans. So we had a control, which was untreated corn with bone meal application. So the bone meal application was basically to represent organic matter being added, like some kind of manure-based amendment. Then we also had untreated control. So without the bone meal, we had a spinosyd seed treatment, which would be considered a biological and also approved for use in organic. We had the neonic treated seed, fungicide treated seed, and a diamide treated seed. And you can see that without any seed treatment, we had very poor corn populations. You can see in general what our target was about 36,000 plants to the acre. And regardless of seed treatment or not, our populations were low, but they were very low in the control plots. I mean, not acceptable, actually. So around 30,000 would be acceptable, maybe 28,000 plants per acre. But with the controls, those populations, especially around 15,000, would probably be considered a catastrophic loss. So again, this is just 1 year data. We had a great year to do it. It was very wet and cold, and we planted, I believe we planted May 7th. So it was really early. And the conditions were not good at all. I mean, as far as corn growth and production. This same trial was also conducted in New York by a number of collaborators. So there'll be numerous sites plus ours that will go into a bigger, project report. Let's see here. We also looked at soybeans. We didn't see as big of a difference in soybeans, and that is, that's been reported by others as well. Soybeans are usually planted later in the season. So, in many cases, the ground would be much warmer. You would expect the plants to germinate and emerge faster. Soybean recommendations are to plant when the soil hits 60 degrees. Although many people do start to plant in May, it is generally, most farms will plant after seeding corn. There's more of a window for planting soybeans. So these were planted towards the end of May. And you can see where we did add the bone meal, we did have lower populations. We had lower populations overall again compared to our target. And that that's concerning too, that the conditions were that bad, that regardless, of seed treatment or not, we didn't have great populations. And you can see the difference, the bone meal makes when you're adding in that organic material that's really attractive to some of these pests. So, we use this to kind of replicate other types of organic amendments that farmers would be using, maybe poultry manure, cow manure. Some people actually do use bone meal, but it does seem to increase the issues that we see with these, some of these pests. And I think that's it. That's what I have for the moment. I should add also, there were a couple of other trials that we have conducted and are trying to complete at this point. The first trial that I don't have any data put together for yet, and we didn't do this last year, was looking at neonic dust coming off from planters during planting season. And we went out and set up these dust collection units this spring when farmers were planting. And I will say this was difficult to get done because of the season again. And so what we did was we put slides, these glass slides, kind of on a cardboard plate, and we put the slides out at varying distances from the planter, and they were placed basically to catch dust as the farmer was planting. So, we ended up positioning those in whatever spot made sense, really based on the direction of planting and the wind speed during that planting event. And then we also set up some slides on the ground so that when the planter went over the top of the slides, if anything was kind of coming out of the planter during planting and not going directly into the ground, that we would catch that as well. So we did that at 5 sites. We had hoped for more, but with the weather conditions the way they were, it was very difficult. I will say, interestingly, this spring, there definitely wasn't much dust at all because it was wet. And there also wasn't a lot of wind. And maybe I wouldn't have noticed the wind as much, except that we kind of wanted it to be windy so that as the plant and dusty. So as the planter was moving, we would have something moving that would possibly get picked up by these slides that were sitting out around the planting area. So we completed that project. The slides have been sent to the lab for analysis, and I just got the data back maybe a week or so ago. And I will say, on first glance, there was only one site that had any detectable neonicotinoids on the slides. So I need to look at that obviously a lot closer, but it doesn't appear like we were able to catch, much dust or any neonicotinoids, moving off from the field this year. I need to talk to the lab as well to kind of understand the results better. But again, it wasn't dusty at all, and it also wasn't very windy. The only plate that I saw where there was some detectable neonicotinoids was one site, and it was under the planter, which we might expect, obvious for some dust with neonicotinoids might come off the planter. Other people have seen that. We did see it at one site, but none of the others, which I was actually pretty surprised because I would have expected that to happen at least. We didn't need wind, you know, the planter just went right over the top of the slides. You know, the method we used had been published by a couple of folks, used by a couple of folks. So, you know, it wasn't something we made up on our own. So I felt good about that. Not that we couldn't come up with our own methods, but to utilize somebody else's, you know, process also so we could compare. But again, that I'll have more on that once we get to look through everything. The final project that we pushed off until later in the season is looking at fluency agents and dust coming off from planters using different fluency agents. So, you know, a lot of farmers use talc or graphite. And in past research, that has been shown to kind of be very abrasive and to kind of scratch off the neonicotinoid seed treatment. So there was the development of some alternative fluency agents. And there really hasn't been much data collected on those. We've also heard from colleagues and, you know, through the industry that the seed treatment formulation has changed since this original research was done. And so, you know, we've been trying to understand if the seed coatings are more stable so that they don't come off during planting or with the fluency agents. So to do that research, we basically have to hook up kind of a big vacuum bag to the planter. And the planter was really busy this spring, so it just, and given the really shortened spring work season, we decided to hold off. So we're hoping to complete that actually in the next couple of weeks. We are trying to wait again for the ground to dry out because we do need to actually run the planter to make sure that we're creating you know, realistic conditions and basically we're catching all the dust that comes off of the planter through this vacuum bag. Anyway, so we need some kind of dry, we need a little dry stretch to complete the project. So hopefully we'll have that done in a couple of weeks. But yeah, I guess that would now end my update.
Thank you, Heather.
Yeah.
I had a question and then it's gone. Oh yeah, did you net out for the vacuum bag, right? So if you're going to then.
So the vacuum bag goes around yeah, it sort of goes around the exhaust of the planter, the vacuum planter. And so again, we're using another kind of method that we, you know, that has been published. It was published from the original kind of neonic seed treatment work that was done. And so, you know, we have to basically fit this vacuum bag around the outlet of the planter, which we've figured out how to do. You know, the problem is our planter's like 12 rows too. So, you know, there's just a lot of logistical pieces, but we did finally get it to work and figured it out. The other piece is the amount of labor involved with getting all the material out of the bag, which I think you were on that email with the lab. Yeah. Like, okay, you know, in the original methods, they kind of scraped out this bag and then they cut pieces of the bag and they soaked the bag. And anyway, but we did sort of chat with those researchers and kind of their goal is a little bit different than ours, so we did come up with an alternative plan to still use the vacuum bag, but we're inserting the slides in the bag to be able to catch whatever dust onto those slides and then remove those slides and send them off to the lab so they can use their same methodology. So I think that's all a go.
That's great. Yep, that's what I was thinking. I was like, I thought slides were somehow in there, but yeah, so they're going in the bag.
Yes.
My second question was at the Discovery Acres is where you're collecting the water sample, testing the water samples for neonics.
Yep.
By any chance, is that also a site where you may have done the dust slides? I was just thinking if you collected this dust slides when you planted at Discovery Acres.
Yes,
Okay.
we actually did use that as a site. Yep.
So if there was any way to show, right, like the dust and water somehow.
And we're also measuring the neonics in the soil there as well. Yep, throughout the season. We did sort of cut off some of the soil measurements. We reduced how many we were doing based on our data last year. But yeah, nope, we're still collecting soil, and we're collecting soil at the Alberg site as well. And then we did go back and sample at the Alberg site last year's trial, a year later to look at neonicotinoid residue after a year. And that was a site that had not had corn, a history of neonic corn. So we were trying to understand how quickly it would actually degrade. Like when would we get to the point where we don't detect it any longer?
So it didn't get planted this year.
No, we had a new site.
Yeah.
Yep. But we did go back and resample, and we could sample again. We didn't plant anything there because we wanted to hold on to the site just in case we wanted to sample one more time.
Yeah. Any other questions for Heather? Go ahead, Becky.
Yeah, just two quick questions. You mentioned that you had only one site that had detectable neonics, and that was under the planter. I was curious if you knew, did all of those sites use the same seed from the same vendor, or was it all their choice? Because what came to mind was perhaps one batch that wasn't treated as well as the others, potentially, if all the others were.
Yeah, so at each site, we collected a whole range of data, and we were actually trying to find sites that were really different. You know, we wanted sites that, had different planters, different type of field management. So we recorded all that. We got seed tags, so that we knew what the variety was and what it was treated with and at what rate. So yeah, it'd be interesting to dig in and see, what was going on there. Yep.
Yeah, definitely. And then the second question was, you mentioned a bigger report for the corn population that you collaborated with New York. I was curious if that is a report that was done for regulators, it'll come to a regulatory body or legislator, or it'll be academic publication where.
No, I mean, we're just all doing the same project. So I imagine, I've already sent my data to Cornell, so we'll probably work together on a summarized report. And I'm not sure. I'm sure it'll be public. It won't, I'm assuming they'll want to publish it in an academic journal, but they're trying to do the same work we are, to inform all of us.
I was just thinking where to watch out for it because it'll be interesting to see.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm sure I'll be sending it on to folks here. So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Anything else for Heather? Awesome. Well, we really Appreciate it, Heather. I know this is busy time. So as always, thank you very much for taking some time for us and to
Yeah.
keep us and for doing such great and relevant research for us. So we really appreciate it.
Yeah, and we'll be we'll have more soon. So sorry there wasn't a ton there yet.
Great. Well, it's still, yeah, I mean, it's good for us
Still
to just hear
going.
again. Yeah, what's happening and yeah, and even just your struggles, yeah, and reminding us how wet everything is.
Yeah, and still very, very
Yep.
wet. So, all right, everyone, have a great day.
All right, thanks very much, Heather.
Bye.
All right, Laura, you are ready. Yeah, so our last speaker is Laura, also from UVM. And we asked her to talk about yeah, farming practices that support pollinators. So kind of from the other end of things. So what we can do, what we can build into our best management practices. So take it away, Laura.
Okay. Let's share. You see my presentation?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me today. I'm Laura Johnson, Pollinator Support Specialist with UVM Extension. And today I'm going to be talking about farming practices that support pollinators. And I primarily work with commercial vegetable and berry farms in my current role in Extension. And so a lot of what I'm going to share today applies to that type of farming system. Occasionally, I'll get pulled into livestock operations, more so like grazing systems to talk about farming practices for pollinators, but I'm not going to cover that too much today. And so this will be focused more on small, diversified veg farms. Let's see, please. There. So I'm going to start with an introduction to pollinators and then talk about planning and implementation of supportive pollinator habitat. And I think you've heard from Spencer at the Vermont Center for Eco Studies. So I think you probably have a little bit of background on pollinators, but within Extension and the Pollinator Support Program, our tenets of pollinator support are just remembering that there are a lot of different types of pollinators. All of them need flowers and safe places to nest. And the crops and plants that are grown on commercial farms, which is my primary audience, can provide food and habitat that supports those populations. And their management tactics affect the floral and nesting resources, and farms are already doing a lot to support our wild populations of pollinators and are adapting to provide the needs of pollinators. I always like to start by distinguishing between managed and wild pollinators. My work primarily focuses on wild pollination services on farms for crop pollination, though I do have a background with managed pollinators and also work with them to some degree on farms in Vermont, but mostly wild pollinators. And so the obvious one are honeybees. Bumblebees are also commonly used as a managed pollinator. Mason bees are sometimes used in tree fruit production. And then another example here are alkali bees, which are used in alfalfa crop pollination out in the Pacific Northwest, where they manage kind of soils around alfalfa plantings for these soil-dwelling bees. So mostly in Vermont, we'll see honeybees and bumblebees when it comes to managed pollinators on farms. Most farms are not using any type of commercial pollinators, maybe to some degree in pumpkins or apples. Whether or not they're needed within our specific landscape is kind of a question, but most farms are relying on these pollinators, all the moths, wasps, bees, butterflies, um, in our uh, in our landscape here. A lot of what I tend to lean towards are supporting bees in ag landscapes, and there's a few reasons for that. One is a lot of the research that has been done around supporting pollinators and crop production has been done on bees because they contribute so significantly to marketable crop yields and quality. Um, so that's one reason. Another reason is that I'm still learning. I'm not an entomologist, so I'm still learning about how other types of wild pollinators kind of come into play when it comes to crop pollination. And a good example of that is like moths and apples, not necessarily, I don't think in the Northeast, but in the other eastern states south of us, there has been some findings around moth pollination in commercial apple production. There's also less research done on other types of pollinators in crop production. So it's a really new and kind of budding field when it comes to the specifics around crops and different wild pollinators. In terms of bees, there's over 350 species in Vermont, around 4,000 in the US, 20,000 across the world. And there's a lot of research showing that wild bees produce larger and better yields. This is specific to research at the Gund Institute where they looked at wild bees and blueberries, but there's emerging research around other crops as well and the significance of wild bees there. So all pollinators and insects are facing kind of these four top threats: loss of habitat and resource diversity, pests and pathogens, pesticides, and climate change. I tend to focus on cultivating habitat and resource diversity, and you'll see that here today. So there's a lot of different ways to counter the four threats that I just mentioned. And you know, where to start as a farm or a farmer can be a bit daunting because there are so many different types of wild pollinators, and they all have different life cycles and live in different places and feed, have different food preferences. And so thinking about where to start, we've started to develop a pollinator support plan, which can be found on the Vermont Vegetable and Berry Growers Association website. And it's under the VVBGA member programs. And there's four, actually, there's three listed here, but there's another new one for Pick Your Own Farms. But pollinator support planning is a tool that we have started to develop there. And so typically this is going to be for a grower who is growing crops that require insect mediated pollination. So these are just, you know, not all inclusive lists of what types of crops those might be, and that are also found in Vermont and then the Northeast. Some are more dependent on insect pollination than others, but if anybody is growing these types of foods on their farms, then they are needing insect pollinators and may consider creating a plan. It's also, you know, if you're growing crops for seed production, some farms who may be just growing leafy greens or any other crop that may not require insect mediated pollination might be interested in enhancing biodiversity or supporting any managed bees in the landscape. And you know, if you're using pesticides, creating a plan can help plan around protecting pollinators through pesticide use. So some tangible benefits of writing a plan are just supporting those marketable yields, reducing the risk and cost associated with crop pollination by managed bees or by hand, developing a planting or management plan for supporting insects needed on the farm. Crops benefit not only from pollination services, but some of these pollinators are also pest predators, so enhancing habitat, diverse habitat to support those dual purpose insects is important. And it also could be used as a marketing tool to display on a website or print out for customers. And I've seen some farms doing this with their produce safety plans, and so another opportunity there with a pollinator support plan, depending on the customer base and farm interest. And then, of course, the pollinator benefits of writing a plan are providing, bees and other pollinators are feeding on pollen and nectar from flowers, and of course, all need safe nesting spaces throughout their life cycles. And a pollinator plan can help develop those spaces on the farm. And just as a reminder, or maybe it's new for some folks, if we're talking about bees specifically, there's kind of 3 spaces in our landscape that they're living. Cavity nesting bees are typically the bees that live in colonies like bumblebees and honeybees. Most other types of bees are solitary. 90% of bee species are solitary and don't live in colonies like those 2 managed bee species. And 70% of all bee species live in the soil. So soil health becomes a pretty important management practice to consider when it comes to nesting habitat of bees, and then also tunneling bees that might be in snags, or this is a raspberry stem where some will burrow into the stem for laying their eggs and nesting. Oops. So I'm going to run through briefly the pollinator support plan. This is kind of the outline that the plan covers. And I also, and for each section of the plan, the farm information, cover crops, dedicated pollinator habitat, mowing practices, pest management, pollinator monitoring, tillage practices, water sources, and use of managed pollinators. All of these sections, I've just partnered with some pictures and examples of how farms have started implementing these themes of pollinator supportive habitat in their landscapes. So this is a very broad overview of what can be done, and really dialing into the specifics of plant types or flower phenology versus bee phenology or other type of insect phenology. Those I'm not going to cover today. I also wanted to highlight that we've started working closely with NRCS, and I'm on my way to finishing up my TSP certification, technical service provider certification, to be able to provide farms with pollinator habitat design, DIA, conservation practices, so that design and implementation activities. So basically a pollinator support plan that is funded by a cost share through NRCS. So we have started to adjust our tool on the VVBGA website to also support that planning process, but also for folks that may not be interested in working with NRCS, it's still a useful and valuable tool for those folks as well. So as I go through this, some of the sections will be paired with some NRCS practices that after completing a plan, folks can engage with in terms of getting cost share to incentivize the installation of practices. The plan begins with just looking at the farm broadly. Maybe that includes a map for the farm and where they are already implementing pollinator habitat or planning to implement pollinator habitat, and then just kind of general farm information about acreage, what kind of crops they grow, what their market base is, and general information, profile information like that. The first section is cover crop selection and management. And we started with this because most diversified farms are using cover crops in the state of Vermont. So it felt like a very accessible way to support pollinators on farms in Vermont. And cover crops, when they're left to flower, can support pollinators all season long by providing pollen and nectar, and around crop bloom or during crop bloom, which helps provide floral diversity and reduce species competition for floral resources, and of course also supports soil health, which is important for those ground nesting bees. So an example of how this has been playing out on farms, 2022 was the first full year of the pollinator support program. It's a very new program at Extension, and we worked with farms to plant a single planting of multi-species cover crops to provide floral resources throughout the season. And we use mustard, buckwheat, sunflower, and sun hemp for blooms through June to September, more or less, depending on when they planted. And this went okay. It was a pretty droughty year, but so there was some stand establishment. So depending on the establishment challenges, so depending on the site, it went better or worse. But it was a really excellent introduction to what pollinator support might look like on farms. And we've continued that through to this year, though we've gone through from a single plant, multi-species planting to multiple single species plantings over time through the calendar season. So from April to, let's see, planting April to July, and then blooms from June to September using some annual flowering cover crops. So we're in the midst of this now with a peer group of folks that have been focusing on these plantings. There's 10 farms that did this, and they've been monitoring as well for pollinators at bloom periods and reporting back, and we've been sharing that with the farm community through the newsletter on through the VVBGA. These are the crops that were planted, pretty familiar, most of them to a lot of farms: oats and peas, buckwheat, mustard. Phacelia is kind of the newer species that folks have less experience with, but it is an important species in terms of pollen resources when it comes to cover crops. Just some other examples of annual flowering cover crops. Example within a high tunnel on the left here, and then on the right, some sorghum Sudan grass mixed with sunflowers. Another example on a farm that was establishing a strip of fruit trees between their high tunnels, and used some biennial cover crop here of yellow sweet clover during that establishment period. The next section in the plan is the dedicated pollinator habitat. And this is typically establishing areas of herbaceous or shrubby plants to provide diverse flowers and forage and nesting habitat on the farm. And there's all of these, potential NRCS practices that folks could engage with and get some financial support through. These are typically in non-cropped areas and also include installing artificial nests as well. But it's important, providing different types of flowers supports different types of pollinators. So these, like a sunflower is an example of an open-faced flower. So certain insects that don't have tongues can feed on that type of flower versus something like a legume or a clover species, where some insect really has to work to get inside, whether that's through having the strength to pull the flower parts open to access pollen and nectar, or they have tongues like moths and butterflies and bumblebees to be able to access those resources. So just a brief example of the importance of flower diversity. One type of kind of dedicated pollinator habitat is this idea of a pollinator meadow. This was done at Otter Point Farm, Addison County. I don't typically recommend this as a starting point for farms. It's pretty tricky to establish pollinator meadows, but if you can get it going and you have the time and the space, because there's a lot of weeding involved, it does provide some really beautiful herbaceous habitat for all types of insects. Another kind of easier planting to establish are riparian areas or woody hedgerows with flowering shrubs. Willows are great early season floral species that farms will sometimes install in order to support early spring pollinators. Two examples of that here, of one being installed at Digger's Mirth Collective Farm in the Intervale, and then an existing stand at Owl's Head Blueberry Farm in Richmond, adjacent to her fruit trees and then blueberries, which are not in that picture. Intervale has done a lot of work with Audubon Vermont, who has a bird and bee friendly farming program. And this is just an example of a wildlife habitat planting that was intended for both bees and birds in some marginal habitat on farms that is no longer usable for cropping, usually because of flooding. So this was a space that was regularly flooded, and so they just decided to turn it into some habitat space. And then it might just be adding some artificial nesting sites as a dedicated space for bees, like mason bees who nest in tunnels. You can see in the piano, this at the farm between, they drilled some holes into the piano where some bees can nest. Also a lot of snakes living in that piano for rodent control. And then I've seen on several farms installations of mason bee homes, and those do need to be regularly maintained, but kind of like easy things to do on farms. Also, just maintaining bare soil. And so you can see here on the left a little cellophane bee peeking out of its hole in the spring during apple bloom at the Hort farm. That was just near the parking lot that gets, regularly mowed pretty closely. So there's exposed soil for some of those soil nesting bees there. And then a farm road at Luna Blue Farm in South Burlington every year has a huge, massive mating aggregating space in April of some mining bees, which are important for fruit pollination. And there's just thousands of bees mating in this farm road. So they are just mindful of that and aren't driving their tractors or heavy equipment in that space during the few days that this happens. So mowing practices are another kind of low lying or low hanging fruit for folks. I feel easy to adjust mowing practices to improve fooding nesting space on farms. So just waiting to mow. If you have fields of goldenrod, Joe Pye weed, other types of asters, folks can, either neglect mowing for all of the space or do some rotational mowing. So maybe only mowing half of it a year and half of it another year, just to keep, trees and shrubs from coming in. Also, I started to see on farms, or at least notice, that in some places they fenced out marginal areas of pasture where it might be too wet for their livestock to enter, or the forage isn't growing at a level of productivity that makes sense. So they've just kind of fenced out wildflowers from those areas to prevent livestock from entering and providing bird and bee nesting space there. And I've seen some very strategic fencing around milkweed plots also, which has been interesting to support monarchs in grazing systems. And then just in any type of field cropping system, squaring up fields and leaving a little extra space for woody shrubs, wildflowers to grow. Of course, there's always invasives to worry about and needing to deal with those. But depending on the invasive species, there are food resources that are provided there as well. Pest management is another part of the plan, and this is really kind of identifying ways to prevent or avoid using pesticides, but also thinking about best management practices with pesticide use. So just some examples that are also funded by NRCS: low tunnels and mulching to avoid different types of pesticides in the landscape, and also monitoring, whether that's actively monitoring the field with sticky cards, or thinking about and planning for use of the Northeast Weather Association tool, where you can monitor disease conditions before applying sprays in apples, for example. So, and then also highlighting just best management practices to reduce risk of killing or compromising the well-being of pollinators or beneficial insects in the landscape, like spraying outside of bloom, while also being mindful to include in a plan following any state or federal laws as part of that process. Pollinator monitoring is something that I've been engaged with since the beginning, in terms of understanding what types of pollinators are in these different types of habitat features that are on farms. So monitoring can be used for that. It can also be used to assess how things change over time as management practices change. And this is just one example of a farmer up in Grand Isle who has blueberries, who has started monitoring his blueberries during bloom every year. He was very proud of his monitoring sheet here that he had, and was sharing in the VBBGA newsletter the bumblebee counts that he was finding in the spring on his blueberries that he hadn't really done before. So that's really fun to hear from folks. Tillage practices is another section of the plan, just thinking about those soil nesting bees and how tillage practices impact those nest spaces, and depending on the type of insect or bee, nests are going to be, more shallow or deeper in the landscape. So kind of identifying through the plan different ways to conserve soil habitat for bees. I'll also mention, though, while some bees may prefer undisturbed tillage systems, there's other types of bees that actually really thrive in intensively tilled systems. And one example of that is a squash bee, and which is a specialist bee to the large big-belled squash flowers like pumpkins and winter squashes and summer squashes. And these are very resilient native bees that actively create their nests in highly disturbed areas and pollinate squash plants, which are totally dependent on insect pollinators. And this is just a quote from a VBBGA newsletter where a farmer was sharing their kind of thought process around leaving bare soil between squash beds to encourage nesting habitat of those squash bees. And then the last two sections here are going to be water sources and use of managed pollinators. And water sources is really just thinking about and kind of being supportive of kind of clean water initiatives that farms are already engaged with, and providing clean water for insects and pollinators, because some of these bees are using water to mix with soil to make their nests, and obviously having clean water is an important piece of that to maintain the health of those bees that are directly interacting with that resource. Mason bees are an example of this. And then honeybees, if folks have honeybees or are concerned about honeybees actively use water to regulate hive temperatures, especially in times of extreme heat. And then the management of standing water to prevent unintentional beneficial insect mortality. So thinking about 5-gallon buckets in fields. I was going through some of the pollinator plans that were on the website, and somebody mentioned that they turn their 5-gallon buckets upside down to avoid trapping bees in rainwater. And then I went to the farm the other day and took a picture of a new like nursery space that they were establishing. And then later I realized like, wow, they actually are turning their 5-gallon buckets upside down. And I was pretty impressed, and it was exciting to see that. And then finally, if folks are using managed pollinators or just hosting managed pollinators on their farms, there's a lot of veg farms that allow honeybee keepers to have their hives on the farms. Thinking about ways to protect colony health during crop pollination, and then also if folks are actively using honeybees or bumblebees, minimizing threats to wild bees that may come from those managed pollinators. So protecting managed bees on farms might look like fencing, so protecting from bears and skunks and other things that might want to get into either bumblebees here on the left or honeybees here on the right, and destroying those colonies during really sensitive times when pollination needs to occur. Or in the case of bumblebees specifically, using queen excluders on commercial bumblebee boxes to reduce the potential for commercially bred bumblebee species genetics, kind of reducing the risk of spreading those genetics to wild bee populations, and then also preventing pest and pathogen exposure to wild bees with queen excluders. So kind of coming back to these like tenets of pollinator support, and how we think about pollinators in the farm landscape and what they need, they can all really be championed through the use of a pollinator support plan, and then implementing the kind of key components of the plan as it applies to your farm. So that's all I have for you today. These are the folks that are funding me, including folks, you all at the Agency of Ag. And if anybody has questions about all of this, I'd be happy to answer them. Okay, Steve.
Yeah, hey, thanks for that presentation. It's very interesting. So you mentioned the monitoring of the pollinators. Is that something you're accumulating all that information, or each individual farmer doing it, or how's that work?
Yeah, so during the 2022 cover crop plantings, I kept all of, I was primarily doing the monitoring of the pollinators during that time, so I have that data. And then this year with the cover crop plantings, the farmers and myself are engaged with monitoring the pollinators. And so yes, I have that information. And then, I kind of do one-off monitoring events, but in terms of kind of consistent pollinator monitoring, we do have that. I've also been engaged with the Gund Institute and Taylor Ricketts' work in blueberries, and we also have monitoring data from that research as well.
Is that published or going to be published, or?
So the blueberry data, there has been published data from the blueberry work in Taylor's lab from a few years ago. What has been happening in the past couple of years is not yet available. And then the pollinator monitoring data that I've been working on with the cover crops more specifically, I will produce in the form of a case study, because I haven't been doing it in like a statistically significant way. So it's kind of more anecdotal, especially in using data coming from growers as well. But I hope to be able to do that in the future, to have more kind of detailed data that would be publishable. But right now it's going to be in the form of like a case study of this is what we experienced on these 10 farms, or before it was the 12 farms.
Okay, well, thank you very much. That's something I'd like to talk to you about, maybe working on that with you. We've been talking to Ryan Ramos over at Center for Eco Studies for doing that kind of work, and we actually proposed a contract with them to do that. Just didn't work out this year, but I'd like to talk about including you in that. So I'll give you a call.
Oh yeah. Yeah, they're great. They do, they've been doing that for a long time and have a lot of experience with that.
Yeah, so I'll give you a call. Thanks.
Great. Stephanie?
Hey, I have a question about, is Vermont the first state to do this work? In the way that you're doing it?
I think so. It has been quite the ride, kind of like coming into this pollinator program, because in terms of extension work, I have started to see more and more kind of formalized programs around pollinator support on farms in extension, which is really exciting. I do know that like the Xerces Society and another nonprofit that is escaping me right now have like pollinator plans. Like the Xerces has Be Better certified pollinator plans that folks can engage with, though I did learn that it's more for like companies like Walmart or Whole Foods that kind of buy into this plan to be able to label their produce, and it's not something that smaller farms can engage with so much. So I haven't seen other extension programs with like support plans like we've been working on, other than like NRCS has this DIA pollinator habitat plan, though I haven't seen an example of one. So we're hoping to be able to do that. So I would love to learn if other people are doing this type of work, but it's kind of like in bits and pieces that I've been learning from folks, but kind of like at a holistic level. I am still seeking out a fellow extension colleague to collaborate with on that.
Thanks.
Steve.
Yeah, I got another question. So you mentioned the NRCS practice support. The farms you worked with, did they take advantage of that, or did they just do it on their own? Or were they involved in the NRCS?
Yeah, so some of the examples I was showing you were funded through NRCS and some are not. And so we really hope that through this partnership and becoming a TSP and being able to kind of directly engage with growers, for those that are interested in cost share opportunities, we can help enhance opportunities where farms can take advantage of financial resources through the NRCS. And some folks are already doing that, but not everybody.
Sorry, Lauren, you're doing a good job of monitoring your own questions. I'm taking notes. Anybody else? And I apologize, Ryan's not on the call today. He
Yeah, I'll
yeah, so that connection is not quite here today. But he promised he would check back in so we can just
well, I'll give him a call.
Coordinate that.
Great.
Any other questions for Laura? Awesome. Well, we greatly appreciate it, Laura. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Super helpful for us as we too build our best management practices for, it goes hand in hand with Neonix's pollinator protection. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So last but not least, we have Pam, who is going to take us back to neonics specifically. And she is going to give us a quick review of EPA's recent occupational exposure assessment for treated seed treatment. Right?
Yeah. Yeah, something like
that. You tell us.
Hi, everyone. This is really quick, and it's in the context of letting the AIB know about all the changes for neonics. And I'll let you all figure out for yourselves how relevant you find this at the end, but it should only take me about 5 or 6 minutes. There was press recently about neonics, and that's what this review update is about. So as you know, EPA is required to review every pesticide registration every 15 years. Neonics are currently in the midst of that review period. On June 27th, OPP, the Office of Pesticide Programs, issued a memo updating their occupational and residential exposure assessment for seed treatment uses. And that's why this gets kind of pulled into what we're talking about today. So the background is, in about 2020, EPA issued a preliminary interim decision of the changes they were going to make to the neonic registrations for seed treatments. After that, there was a public comment period. They received a lot of feedback, and sufficient feedback so that in 2022, they had to change the baseline data and essentially the mechanics of how they were doing their risk assessments for these chemistries. And EPA makes the point that the human health risk assessment that they completed in 2017 still stands. Everything stands except for what we're about to talk about. All of the changes that we're about to talk about don't come from new information on neonics being more hazardous. It has to do with, they got feedback from manufacturers on how many hours applicators are treating seeds. And so the exposure portion of the assessment had to change. And it's very specific to the biggest changes are most specific for 2 areas. Commercial seed treatment operations for the folks that are cleaning the equipment when dealing with certain crops. So I've got about 7 slides that kind of summarize this, but in general, for clothianidin, which we see on this screen, it's this short list of beets, broccoli, carrots, leeks, the people cleaning that equipment in commercial seed treatment operations, and on-farm treatment of seed potatoes. Those have exposures where EPA estimates that even if the people cleaning that equipment were to wear the maximum amount of PPE required, that those individuals would receive a greater exposure than is healthy. So that something has to change. All of this in terms of AIB and where you're moving forward to is in the future, we're looking at something has to change. This is EPA saying that something has to change. And you could see label changes related to these uses. For imidacloprid, it is again the people cleaning the equipment at the commercial seed treatment facilities. And it's these crops specifically that EPA has recognized are causing the biggest exceedances. And then for thiamethoxam, which really, it's going to look like has a disproportionate representation in this set of slides because it has the most uses in agriculture. But here you can see that EPA recognized folks doing the seed treatment in that left-hand column, folks doing the packaging in the second column, cleaning the equipment, and then on the very end you have on-farm handling and planting of treated seeds. This particular table goes on for 4 pages, and that's zoomed out so you can start to get a sense for it. But you can really see that third column. It's the individuals that are cleaning the equipment associated with treated seeds that are essentially receiving exposures at work that exceed what EPA estimates to be an appropriate dose. So the summary there, occupational handlers that are on farm with seed potatoes and then occupational handlers that are cleaning equipment associated with commercial operations are the two groups of individuals EPA's looking to make changes for. And how that meets with what AIB is working on, right? The BMPs, and the BMPs that we have are working on use and application. And what we're going to be looking at in the future are changes to the label. But I can't tell you today what they look like. EPA is specifically looking for additional help in refining that assessment so that they can figure out what changes to make. There's a comment period that is open right now. So anybody that has an interest, this is also something folks in extension or companies or farmers who treat seed have the opportunity to weigh in on this. And I have a little example. That link will take you to the document that EPA has created, looking for additional information on the seed treatment scenarios. And this is an example of some of the questions that they're answering. And of course, I'm not going to read through all of this, just to let you know that this is the type of information that they have put out on their on the document they released. But they're asking some really basic stuff. What is the type of equipment most people are using? Are most people using liquids or solids? What is the maximum label rate that you can treat with? But what is the average rate that is being used? They've also asked how many acres are most people able to plant in an 8-hour day? And what is the highest seeding density? Again, these are really the mechanics over EPA trying to set up a robust, realistic scenario for seed treatment. And that's it. That's the update for new information on neonate registrations. I'm ready for any questions.
Okay,
yeah.
So they're saying that current PP is not adequate for treaters, but in some cases, even for the folks who are planting the seed. Not just people treating seed, but actually planting.
Yeah.
Did they have any, I mean, what are they talking about? Too high a rate, not enough PPE, being exposed for too long a period of time? And where did
they have in their documentation, like the pounds, and there's this acronym that I'm forgetting now. Essentially, it's the volume of seed treated. And I think what it was is the volumes per individual were
too large.
Was too large for that.
How about for the people planting?
And I don't remember specifically, but it's being averaged on this volume handled. And that's why they're trying to figure out how many acres are you planting in a day. And it's getting into the exposure interval for this is acute exposure and subchronic exposures. And I think there are also some individuals working more days than they expected, right? Like it has to do with the size of the treating facility. Okay. Is it one person that's working year round on every single seed that comes through? Because they go into some details of even the baggers don't just bag. The people on the tractors don't just drive a tractor. They're getting out and they're measuring depth penetrated. Like, so they're touching other parts of the implementation, other parts of the field. So I think that's what they're,
any sense about where they're going to get the information they need? I mean, this is the American Seed Trade Association. I mean, it's open for public comment, right?
Yeah.
So you always go look at the comments.
Yeah. I think it'll be interesting to see what comes back on this next step.
Jonathan's not on the call, is he? We should probably make sure he hears about this. See, he's a seed treater. Or maybe we'll send him an email.
Sure.
I have to talk to him.
Oh, there's the stop sharing. I apologize.
This is me just being dumb. So I guess I was trying to hear a lot of things so it is the people planting also outside of seed potatoes?
For a very small group of like one chemistry and okay crops.
Yeah, okay.
And I can show you that document.
Okay.
Properly.
I just wanted to make sure I was capturing that. So it's people planting. Go ahead, Stephanie, you can ask your question.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, and I don't know if this comes into play with what you just talked about, Pam, but whether or not there's a quality control, quality assurance documentation for treating seeds as relative to coatings in particular, but does, and you don't have an answer for this, but it, like the industry, what does the industry provide?
Becky might be able to tell us. What do you think, Becky?
I see a hand up.
I
Besides my
don't.
own.
I don't know if we provide, that type of information on a label or something. I haven't seen it, but I will say there's the Heubock testing that they do the dust off and everything, and that then there is risk assessments that go along with it. So I think the data's there. It's a matter of finding out where it's, is it only coming in these data call-ins and then in comment sections, or is it published somewhere on a material safety data sheet or label? If the group wants to know, I can certainly look into that further, but there is data associated with things there.
Becky, is there a standard that they're supposed to try to meet? Or
For treating the seed, yes. And that's where that Heubock testing method comes in, because they have to test like how much of that pesticide comes back off of the seed, like in this big tumbler that would look kind of like the agitator in a dryer or something, or a washing machine, where they tumble the seed, mimicking the planting process and things. So
but you understand that's a test, but is there a standard they have to meet with that test?
Yes. To the best of my knowledge, let me clarify that. What?
Is that like an OSHA standard, or I'm just trying, who would set that kind of standard is what I'm trying to figure out.
And
I think it's multiple. I would say with your risk assessment of the humans, it would be OSHA. There's the equipment manufacturers. So like the planters have standards associated with it that were changing. I know when I was in charge of the bee care program from like 2014 to 2019, there was new equipment standards coming out for equipment that would hit the market for the planters. And so that we got the humans, we got the planter. I can get you more information.
Yeah, I would be I'm sure other folks would too, is that whole process, what the standard is, how the standard's set, who monitors for compliance with the standard. It's just a lot of questions.
That would be
Sure.
interesting.
Okay, I'll follow up on that.
All right, appreciate it.
Any other questions, comments before I open it up for public comment?
Great.
All right, I know that was, information dump, back to our old days of hearing a lot in one sitting. We are hoping to continue this for our work plan and developing, and we're going to look through your responses to the BMP Neonic survey. So stay tuned for kind of our next plans and future agendas. So with that, any member of the public wish to give a comment for today? Awesome. So thank you all very much for joining us and participating, and stay tuned. All right, thanks all. Have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I would send you. Yeah.